On the 15th of August 2021, a trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom and the US was announced, the goal of which, according to the joint media statement released by the Australian government at the time, is to protect shared values and promote security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. The partnership was dubbed AUKUS, and 4 years on, it continues to stir up controversy and confusion as to what exactly this partnership represents and if the plans of these three governments are even possible.
These are the most sophisticated weapon systems in the world.
Currently, it's building barely one Virginia-class sub a year.
Thank you, Boris. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal.
Be discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir.
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australia-US Defence Alliance.
Yeah, well, we'll be discussing that.
No nuclear subs! No nuclear subs! No war on China! No war on China!
I think it's more a question of how much of a downsize they're looking at, including potentially total cancellation, which would be catastrophic, a huge mistake for the US, with enormous consequences, obviously, for Australia and the UK.
AUKUS is divided into two stages, or pillars, the first of which involves Australia's acquisition of 8 nuclear-powered submarines. Since the 1950s, the UK and US governments have been sharing nuclear technology and research between themselves, and AUKUS serves to bring Australia into the fold. The current goal is for Australia to receive 3 Virginia-class submarines from the partnership by the early 2030s, and subsequent submarines are to be built and provided to Australia by both the US and UK governments in the years to follow. These submarines will be paid for by the Australian government for a price of over $368 billion AUD over the course of this first stage. The second pillar of AUKUS is a bit less easy to summarise and involves what is known as advanced capabilities. This will include information, research and technology that will be shared between the three countries, ranging from underwater robotics, AI and cybersecurity, quantum technologies and electronic warfare, to name a few of these capabilities. So far, Pillar 1 of the nuclear submarine deal has garnered the most attention from the public and other countries, generating what can only be described as a mixed response. To dive deeper, I spoke with Ewan Levick, the publisher of Australia's largest defence trade media organisation's title, the Australian Defence Magazine.
The argument for AUKUS, and I'll preface this, I think, by saying none of these are necessarily the views of ADM. They're all my personal opinions. From a strategic point of view, the argument for AUKUS is that it reinforces our treaty alliance with the United States, the ANZUS Treaty. So in the same way that the UK and the US have long shared nuclear submarine secrets and capabilities to reinforce that alliance, AUKUS ties us in to the US alliance much more and increases US sort of, not dependence on us per se, but definitely the depth of the relationship. So the US is our main security partner and has been since the Second World War. So it's essentially a strong way of doubling down on an alliance with the world's most powerful country. So that's from a strategic point of view. If you look at it in a little bit more granular detail, acquiring nuclear-powered submarines provides Australia with a naval capability that is the preserve of very few nations, and really is what naval strategists will tell you is the apex predator of the ocean. There's no capability from a military point of view out there like nuclear-powered submarines, because the oceans really are the last place on Earth that you can hide something that big.
Australia's current Collins-class subs were built throughout the 1990s and early 2000s and were originally set to be phased out of active service as early as next year. The retirement of these 6 submarines has now been pushed back into the 2030s, raising concerns about the ageing of the Royal Australian Navy's submarine fleet.
At a tactical level, nuclear submarines have some advantages over conventional diesel-electric submarines that are appealing. So the main one is that they don't have to surface. So diesel-electric submarines every so often they have to come to the surface to breathe air for recharge their batteries. When a submarine surfaces, that's when it's most easy to spot. So you can use satellites or all kinds of things to detect a surface submarine. Nuclear submarines don't have to surface, so they can stay underwater for as long as the crew can handle it mentally, and as long as they've got supplies. So the limiting factor becomes not, recharging the engines; it becomes how much food they can take on board with the crew. So from a detectability point of view, they have some advantages there. They offer the Australian government a range of new options that conventional submarines don't. So one of those main ones is land strike. So a nuclear-powered submarine can fire a Tomahawk missile from beneath the sea against targets deep into land masses. So you'd seen, for example, in the recent strikes, the American strikes on Iran, a lot of the coverage was on the B-2 bomber delivery of the GBUs that hit the nuclear plants in Iran. But Tomahawks were also fired from US nuclear submarines sitting in the Indian Ocean, so against targets deep into Iran. So it provides the Australian government with the ability to hit targets deep into Asia, essentially. So that's sort of what the benefits are from a small level to a strategic point of view. AUKUS has a lot of costs as well, and I think that's where the conversation starts to get nuanced.
Nuanced indeed. When AUKUS was first being negotiated, it was kept secret until it was officially signed off on and announced to the public. Since then, the agreement, and the nuclear submarine deal in particular, has attracted a lot of criticism and its fair share of detractors.
The idea that we need American submarines to protect us, if we buy 8, 3 are at sea, 3 are going to protect us from the might of China. Really? I mean, the rubbish of it.
From the 18th to the 20th of August, the 2025 Submarine Institute of Australia conference was held at the Pan Pacific Hotel here in Perth. Like AUKUS itself, the conference attracted some public protest.
Companies are using Israel, they're letting Israel be their laboratory where they fine-tune all manner of weapons. War crimes, been expressed by the Department of Education. It's a rural, respectable part of society, and as I said, so basically what that means is when the United States goes to war, we go to war.
To investigate further, I spoke with some of those protesting on the day. So would you mind just telling me a little bit about the protest today and what you guys were here for?
We were there because there was a conference for the Submarines Institute Australia, I believe. So they have all these military contractors and businesses, trying to get contracts and deals in the framework of AUKUS. And we want to stop AUKUS. Therefore, we were there to let them know that we were against their plans.
So would you mind just telling us a little bit about what you're here for today and what your position is on AUKUS and the conference inside?
This conference is a gathering of what Bob Dylan used to sing about as the masters of war. I mean, we really have come to a stage in human civilization where these monstrous corporations are just dictating government policies here in Australia and tying us into the worst sort of war crimes that are being committed in Gaza, for example, and also just plundering our economy. This AUKUS deal, which the Australian government signed on to without reference to the Australian people, it's never been voted on in any election. It's holding our entire economy hostage for decades to come. It's insane.
The other countries that have nuclear-powered submarines are Russia, France, the UK, China, India, the United States, and soon to be Brazil as well. All of those countries have economies that are at least twice the size of Australia's, except for Russia, which is about the same size as us, but Russia spends 40% of its federal budget on defense, which we don't want to be doing. So we are trying to operate a great power capability whilst being a middle power economy and a middle power country. Those countries also have populations that are at least 3 times the size of ours as well. So from an affordability point of view and from a demographic point of view, we have far more work to do. We'll have to stretch our resources far further, more than twice as far, 3 times as far as any of those other countries. So $368 billion is a lot of money. And that will probably represent, naval spending as a whole will represent 40+% of our entire defense budget. And then when you take those submarines and you put them in a regional context, the US and China have something like 60+ submarines. So when you take R8 and you add that, you put that on the chessboard in the Indo-Pacific, it doesn't tip the scales. But it is a huge outlay from the point of view of an Australian taxpayer, a massive, massive outlay. If you were to itemize the defense line item, AUKUS would be a huge chunk. It's hundreds of dollars for it. An average Australian salary, every single taxpayer in Australia will be spending hundreds of dollars a year on these submarines.
And what are your main reasons for being opposed to AUKUS?
Well, there are many reasons. Just the technicality of the deals just seem like they don't work out on paper. It seems like even the US themselves are saying we're never going to get the submarines that we're signing up for.
There's a strong possibility that the US will pull out, I think. The US production rate of submarines is just not enough to meet the requirements of both the US Navy and Australia. So the submarine production rate right now is like 1.2 or 1.3 Virginia class per year. That number needs to be 2.3, in order for the president to certify that delivering us submarines does not degrade the capability of the US Navy. Now that increase from 1.3 to 2.3 is monumental, and I can't see a way that it will get there in time.
I think it's Arundhati Roy who says something like, we used to make arms to fight wars, now we make wars to produce arms. So it's kind of like reverted. We believe that we can have relationships that are safe and and constructive with our neighbors in the region without arming ourselves necessarily to the teeth like that, and especially break the kind of alliance with the US.
As mentioned before, the US has been Australia's main security partner for over 70 years, and this is not an alliance that is easy to break. But what would warrant breaking it in the first place? One of the main criticisms of AUKUS is that it takes sovereignty from Australia, and it serves mainly to increase US dominance in the Indo-Pacific.
As for sovereignty, look, I personally think that it certainly will erode our sovereignty. I think we're seeing a lot of signals coming out of Washington at the moment suggesting that the delivery of the submarines will be contingent on Australia providing the US with some sort of guarantee or some sort of idea as to how we will use those submarines in the event of a conflict that America chooses to enter into. So, the Australian government, to their credit, have pushed back on that. And you've seen Albanese and Pat Conroy, the Defence Industry Minister, say that the use of Australian force is a sovereign prerogative of the Australian government. But the US has leverage, undeniably has leverage. And if they were to say, well, we're not going to give you these submarines unless you either spend more money on them or commit to using them in a war of our choosing, and we say no, then they could just not deliver them, and then we won't have any submarines, and that's a problem.
So AUKUS comes with its fair share of nuances and complexities. That's fair to say, but it is happening. The federal government has already paid upwards of $1.5 billion to the United States under AUKUS, with projected spending to be over $2 billion by the end of this year. Should Australia be aligned with the United States in such a way? That really depends on who you ask. Is there a real possibility of Australia cutting ties with the US and ending the AUKUS agreement? That's a little bit more straightforward to answer. Realistically, the US is Australia's strongest bilateral partnership, and this doesn't look to be changing anytime soon. As for AUKUS, there is a possibility Australia could still pull out if the US doesn't do so first.
Just because Australia has already kind of backed out of 2 submarine deals in the past, do you think it is too late for us to back out of AUKUS potentially? Or the submarine deal?
No, it's never too late.
And this takes me back to the media statement announced way back in 2021. This is an historic opportunity for the 3 nations, with like-minded allies and partners to protect shared values and promote security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. If the main goal of AUKUS is to promote security and prosperity, I ask what security, prosperity, and most importantly, peace actually means.
What does peace mean to you, and how would you like to see the Australian government going about obtaining that?
Well, I guess, like I said, I think that producing the tools of war is likely to produce wars. And what peace means to me is not war.
What does peace mean to you, and how do you think the Australian government should be going about achieving that?
Peace, for me, ultimately means a world that works for everyone and in which everyone is included. War leads in the exact opposite direction.
What does peace mean to you personally, and what do you think the best way to go about achieving that is in relation to defence?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question, actually. No one's ever asked me that. Peace is the absence of conflict. Peace is the absence of war. So I would say in the Indo-Pacific specifically, in Australia's relationship with China specifically, right now is peace. Obviously there is tension and there is a lot of grey zone conflict, but there is no hot war right now in the Indo-Pacific. Australia is not on a war footing right now, and that's what peace looks like. And I think continuing to make sure that the country exists in that state and we don't have to mobilise the population and we're not, sending people overseas to fight and die. That's what peace is. As to how peace is maintained, there's a lot of different theories and, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different perspective. I think peace has to be maintained holistically. And one of the risks of, I think, overfunding the Defence Force is that, if all you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. And hammers aren't always the best solution, and not every problem is a nail. I think engagement with the Pacific Islands is crucial. Diplomatic engagement with China is crucial. And, like the foreign aid budget, all those things are crucial, I think, to maintaining Australia's relationships overseas, foreign relations. And the Defence Force is one of those tools. It's not the only one. And I think, I think the Australian government in the Labor's term has done quite a good job so far of getting out into the Pacific Islands, particularly putting Australia's interests forward. I think recognising the state of Palestine. I think all those things are great ways of putting Australia's values out there and engaging with the world beyond the use of the Defence Force or beyond the use of force. So yeah, look, my point is essentially it has a role. The Defence Force has a role, but it's one tool of many.